morning, everybody, and welcome. And everybody at Montrose, everybody watching online, welcome and happy Mother's Day. And excited to celebrate you guys. My wife, Heidi, is the most amazing mother on planet Earth. And so we're excited to celebrate her here in a little bit this afternoon. And just wish that for all of you. And it's a great time to remember and to celebrate and to give that attention that's often lost. Motherhood is one of those things you don't appreciate until you're a parent yourself. You don't realize the sacrifices that are being, you just take your parents for granted. You just do, you can't help it. And until your kids are older, and then you realize what you put these poor people through their whole life. And so appreciate your mother today, or you will answer to the Lord. I'm just saying, she will call me and I will tell the Lord what's going on, but hope you guys have a great day today. Hey, I'm excited to talk about this new series, and we're gonna spend a few weeks talking about what it means to be a follower of Jesus and how that's very, very different than what has often been defined for us. And so we're going to dig at this a little bit and try to understand it. And there's a great book that I read, influenced my thoughts a lot, and I encourage you to read it if you're a reader. It's called Practicing the Way, and it's by an author named John Mark Comer. And I encourage you to grab that and read it. We're not going to teach through his book, but we're going to, it'll be a great companion to a lot of what we're talking about a little bit. And he introduced some new ideas and some new terminology that I really like and really picked up on. So if you like to read or you like to listen, that's what I tend to do. When I say read, I mean listen usually, but grab that and look at it a little bit. But I think this series is going to be incredibly helpful because there has been a conversation, ongoing conversation about what it means to be a Jesus follower since the first people were called to follow Jesus. You can go all the way back into the Bible and you can watch the early Christians and the early church kind of sorting this out. And there was always this effort to give a clean and almost a pure or a real definition of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And what's fascinating is as you look at that and as you adopt that definition into your own life, it will directly affect your relationship with God because it's going to affect what path you take your relationship with God, kind of what route you go on. And what we're going to try to do here in this series is lay out that kind of right path. We're just going to go to the Bible like we always do and say, what was Jesus actually saying? What is the Bible actually teaching? As opposed to all the things that we might have heard or not heard over the course of time. And so I think it's going to be very, very helpful. I think if you are investigating Jesus and you're thinking about whether you want to be his follower or not and thinking about even his place in your life, I think that you're going to find this series like incredibly helpful because we'll give you a really, really clear picture of who he is and what he's like. I think if you're a person who feels like these tinges of embarrassment about what's said and done in Jesus' name, I'm a person that feels that way a lot. Like I'll see something, I just cringe on the inside. If you're that person, what this series is going to do is delineate for you. Is that, like, am I supposed to do that or am I supposed to do that? Or should I be in, like, grouped with these people? Or is there a different path that I'm taking down? I think it's going to help you that way a lot. If you're proud of being a Christ follower and it hurts you to see his name misused, I'm definitely in that camp. Like I'm not ashamed of Jesus at all, but I'm embarrassed or even upset by the way people kind of abuse Jesus' name. This series is going to equip you to know the difference and even give you some language to talk about the difference of like a clear view of Jesus and the way his name is misused. And if you're looking for something to give your life to, this series will inspire you. This is really an important part of this for me. When you look at our culture and you look at kind of our world right now, it's so interesting that in a culture where we can buy anything, where we can do anything, and we can be anything, that has all led to depression and stress. That's what the stats would say. And that's because we're missing something. We're missing a cause. We're missing a reason. We're missing a big picture. Like, why wouldn't I do something? Or why would I endure something? Or why would I sacrifice? Or what do I get up for in the morning? And that stuff really runs out quickly when it's just pleasure or money or success. Like, we all kind of know it's empty. And so if you've been looking, and you're not going to say it this way, but you kind of feel it this way, like, I need something bigger or real or meaningful in my life, I think this series is going to point you toward that a little bit, okay? Now, the reason that we're going to talk about this is because the term Christian has become a very, very confusing term. And it's thrown around all the time, but it's a very, very confusing term. And we all kind of know this a little bit. So Christian gets pulled into politics. Christian has a history that's unflattering. So in the name of being a Christian, we've owned human beings. In the name of being a Christian, we've oppressed groups of people, women, children, other powerless people in the past. In the name of being a Christian, like, these atrocities have happened, and we know that. And so it gets confusing. Christianity's been tied into like a national subculture. Like, we're a Christian nation. We do Christmas, not Hanukkah, kind of a thing, and Christian Judeo-ethics, so it kind of gets tied into that a little bit. There's been spiritual abuse. Like, we know about how the church and pastors and priests and other leaders have abused their position and harmed people. The KKK was founded in the name of Christianity, and it's been an excuse to hate people. Like, if you are not like me, if you disagree with me, if you are someone that I have deemed sinful, now I don't love you, I hate you, and I try to put you kind of away from me. And Christianity has been tied into all of that. Now, where it gets confusing is the idea of Christianity is also tied into all these wonderful things, these absolutely incredible things. So care for the poor. Like, most poverty relief and famine relief and crisis relief in the planet, even today, is done in the name of Christ. And so we'll see that. You kind of are proud of it a little bit, or glad that we're associated with it. Dignity is given to the oppressed. Remember, before Christ, women and children were something that you owned, not people that you loved or gave your life for. So dignity has been given. Abolitionism came from Christians saying this is sinful. It's wicked that a human being would own another human being. Almost all healthcare in the modern healthcare movement was rooted in the idea that everyone has value and life has dignity. That's why many, many hospitals are like Samaritan Hospital or St. Thomas Hospital, etc., because they were founded, the Mayo Clinic was founded by a group of nuns, right, who were doing things in the name of Christ. The dawn of higher education, much of you are graduating right now. Well, higher education came from that. Akron U was founded by a pastor, and it was tied to Bookdale College. That's where that university came from. And then you would go to Yale and Harvard and Oxford and on and on and on. Those were seminaries. Those were started so that people could understand God's word, and even education and well-being could be taken out to the masses. AA was founded by a group of Christians, and on and on and on. So you have these contrasts, right? And they're very, very stark. You've got like the founder of the KKK and the founder of AA. And they're both using that same title and saying, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christ follower. And it causes a high degree of confusion. And that tension revolves around then Jesus and who he is and what he's like and how you would interact with him. So what's fascinating is this. When you go back into the Bible and you kind of read and understand the story of Jesus, the early Jesus followers did not think of themselves as Christians. They would have never said that. They thought of themselves as apprentices. That's how they would have thought through what they were doing. So they didn't think that I'm joining a religion or a church or a cause or a group or a nation. They would have never processed following Jesus that way. They would have said, I'm going to go and I'm going to learn what it means to follow Jesus Christ. And they would have called themselves or thought of themselves as Jesus apprentices. Now, I just defined this real quick so we could talk about it. So a Jesus apprentice would be this. It's someone who follows, learns from, and does what Jesus did because they are seeking to become like him. Is someone who follows, learns from, and does what Jesus did because they're seeking to become like him. And that's how they would have thought of themselves, that I'm learning a trade, I'm learning a way, I'm learning a set of teachings, and that's what I'm giving myself to. I want to learn from, I want to follow, I want to mimic or do, because I want to become like Jesus. The word Christian's only used 3 times in the Bible. It's not even a common term. It's a common term to us, but it's not a common term to the people in the Bible. In the Bible, the word that is used the most, it would be the same word for disciple, follower, or what I'm saying is apprentice. And so that word apprentice is used 269 times in the Bible. And that was the lens and the paradigm that people would have thought through their relationship with God. The term Christian, that came later on. It's in the Bible, but it came later on. And the term Christian was not a term that you would assume for yourself. You wouldn't say, I'm a Christian, or I became a Christian. You wouldn't have talked that way. The term Christian, what it means is it means little Christ, or mimicker of Christ, or one who is like Christ. And being a Christian was not a term that you assumed upon yourself. Being a Christian was an accusation. So people would look and say, look at those people over there. They are following Jesus, doing Jesus stuff, talking about Jesus. They're the ones that believe he rose again from the dead. They're just a bunch of little Christ, just a bunch of Christians, just always under Jesus' teaching. So it wasn't a term that you took for yourself. It was an accusation that people would make when they saw that you were seeking to follow Christ and become more and more and more like him. And it changes when you start to understand that, it changes how you would think of following Jesus. So for us, when we say we're a Christian, or I tend to be Christian, what we mean generally is we mean we're not Muslim, or we're not Buddhist, or we're not Hindus. Like we would put ourselves into a camp. We celebrate Christmas, we don't celebrate Hanukkah kind of thing. But for the world that Jesus taught in and lived in, to be a Christian would have been to be an apprentice, someone who has put their life completely under the teachings, the definition, and the direction of their teacher or their rabbi or their master, so that the goal would be that you would be mistaken for him. When people looked at you being a little Jesus, they would be like, look at that guy over there, he's a Christian. Now, when you start to understand our culture a little bit, you'll start to see where that divide comes from. So 63% of Americans self-identify as Christians. They would say, I'm a Christian. What they mean is I'm not Muslim, I'm not Buddhist, I'm not, they self-identify as Christians. But when you lay out the tenets of apprenticeship, do you follow Jesus? Do you know his teachings? Do you mimic his life? Do you do what he did? Do you want to become like him? Only 4% of Americans would identify themselves in that category. And yet that's the category that Jesus would be calling us to, or when he says, come follow me or be my disciple, that's what he's thinking about and what he asks for us. So when you look at what he says, you'll start to see it a little bit. So this is Jesus in Mark chapter 8. He calls to the crowd to join his disciples and said, if any of you wants to be my follower, my disciple, my apprentice, that word all means the same thing. If you want to be my apprentice, you must give up your own way. So you're not going to do you anymore. You're going to follow me. You're going to take up your cross. You're going to do what I did and learn from me and follow me and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And when Jesus puts out that invitation, he puts it out really, really strongly. It's really fascinating. When you look at what Jesus did and what he taught, what happens is this. Jesus never asked who wants to go to heaven instead of hell. He never asked that question. Because that's an easy question. Would you like to be in heaven and paradise with me or burn forever in hell? Everybody vote, right? So I'm gonna raise my hand. Like, I'm pretty anti-hell, I'll be honest, right? And so, like, I'm gonna raise my hand and say I'd rather go to heaven. Well, Jesus never asked that question. He says, who will follow me? Who will follow me? Who will learn from me? Who will do what I do? Who wants to become like me? And the path to heaven is a path of following me. It's not actually like a little prayer that you pray that doesn't really affect your life anymore. That's what I was taught growing up. That you just do this thing. In my tradition, you had to go, we called it going forward. And so you would go forward. And if you went forward, it was like this magical thing. And the pastor would be there and he'd keep singing till somebody broke. And then he would sing and sing. And then finally, like one time I was like, oh, I'll do it. And so I went forward. I was like, I just trying to get out of here. The game's on. And so I went forward and I was declared a Christian. And I didn't even sign up to follow Jesus. I didn't know really anything that he taught. I didn't do anything that he did. I didn't really want to become like him. I didn't want to go to hell. And my pastor, who loved me, he loved me. My pastor was like, I'm trying to get you out of hell. I'm like, well, I'm going to take that ticket. I'm out, right? Jesus doesn't say that. He says, if you want to be my apprentice, if you want to do that, then you're going to have to, what apprentice means is you give up your own way. What apprentice means is you take up your cross, or you kind of take on the burden or the life change of following me, and you follow me. And if you want to do that, you're going to lose your old life. The old you is going to go away, and the new is going to come, and that's what I'm inviting you into. I want you to be my apprentice, okay? Now, what does that look like in real time with skin on, right? So we'll talk about this a little bit. So when those disciples and those first Christians in the Bible, when they agreed or decided to become an apprentice of Jesus, how did that show up? Like, what actually happened to them? Well, to be an apprentice then and today is kind of the same thing. So here's the first thing they did. To be an apprentice, they accepted Jesus' invitation to follow him. They accepted Jesus' invitation to follow him. What did that look like? Matthew chapter 4 gives us a glimpse of it. One day as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew. So 2 of the 12 disciples, Peter and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fish for a living. So these guys had a small business. They had a boat. Peter had a wife and a family, and he was a successful small businessman because the Bible says that Peter had a large house, right? And so this is a guy. He's got a boat or a fleet of boat. Fishing's been good. He's got a family. Andrew, we don't know as much about, but we could assume the same things. It would be normal for him to be married at that point in his life. And they are doing their deal, working their living. That's what they did. They fished. Jesus called out to them, come be my apprentice. Come follow me, and I'll show you how to fish for people. And they left their nets at once, and they signed up to be an apprentice. They followed him. A little further up the shore, he saw two other brothers, James and John, sitting in a boat with their father Zebedee. This was a family business. Zebedee owned it. James and John would have been set to take over the family company. And so they're up the shore a little bit, repairing nets. And he called to them too, and they immediately followed him. Come be my apprentices. They followed him, leaving the boat and their father behind. So to be an apprentice, you're accepting Jesus' invitation to follow. And what that meant to them and what it would mean to us even today is I leave everything else behind me. So they quit their jobs. They left the family business. That Peter went home and had to explain that one. I sold the boats today, kind of thing. Like, honey, I'm going on the road. I'm an apprentice now. The sons of Zebedee had to talk to their dad. Dad, I know that we were your succession plan, and you were planning on retirement, but we're going to go be apprentices of Jesus. That's how those conversations would have been. And what they did is they followed Jesus with what I call abandon. They were like, we're all in. We're all in on this. And we have decided that we're going to give our lives to the following and the teaching and the works of Jesus, so that when we get to the end of our lives, James and John are no longer known as the sons of Zebedee. They're known as little Christ. That Jesus now has become their identity, not their family of heritage or even their father. So that's what they did, and that's what that means, to be an apprentice of Jesus Christ. The second thing they did is they learned from Jesus. An apprentice learns from Jesus. Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says something really fascinating. This is his way of teaching. He says this, he says, you have heard that the law says that punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you in the right cheek, offer the other cheek as well. So you start to see it. So Jesus looks at his apprentices and says, listen, you've learned one thing, I'm going to teach you another thing. So you've learned if somebody hits you, hit them back. That's what your dad said, that's what your grandpa said, and that's what your mother said. She also chewed tobacco. And so that's what you got from your mom. She was the tough one, right? So you hit them back. Maybe that's just my mom. But you hit them back. I am saying something different. I am saying that if you want to follow me, you turn the other cheek. And so all of a sudden, things are being unlearned and learned. And this would show up in our life all the time today. Jesus would say, you've heard it said that if you get all the money in the world and do whatever you want and you gain the world, that's the secret to happiness. I'm saying to you, unless you lose that and set it aside, you'll actually lose your soul. You've heard it said that finding the best version of you is the way that you find enlightenment. I say to you, unless you die to yourself and give your life to others, you will never be fulfilled. You've heard it said that life is a competition and you need to win it and throw elbows on your way up the ladder. I say to you that you should put other people's interest above your own. You've heard it said that you only go around once. I'm telling you that what is mortal will be swallowed up by life. This part of your life is a vapor. You were actually created to be an eternal being, someone who goes to heaven, or conversely, someone who goes to hell. And so an apprentice is always embracing that. This is what I was taught. This is what mom said. This is what dad said. And I'm going to lean into Jesus. What does Jesus say? And what Jesus says and what his truth is going to be the defining factor of my life, even when it pushes against what I've already learned. No. And that's what the apprentices did. They had to undo a lot of that, and they had to take in who Jesus is and what he was like, right? Here's the third thing. If we're going to be an apprentice, I'm going to accept Jesus' invitation, learn from Jesus, and I'm going to do what Jesus did. I'm going to do what Jesus did. Jesus says this in John 14, I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works that I have done. And so when I am an apprentice, I am looking to do what Jesus did. Jesus fed 5,000 people with some homeschool kid's lunch. Like his disciples were like, we need food, and then we can't afford it. And they came to him and they're like, we found this kid, we took his lunch. And here's some fish and some bread. And Jesus is like, okay. And he took the fish and the bread and he multiplied it and he fed a minimum of 5,000 people that day. And so when you read that verse, when Jesus says, you're going to do more than I've ever done, it's not that we're going to go take people's lunch from them. Give me that Jimmy John's sandwich. We have to feed the hungry, right? That's not what that is. What that means is this. Jesus fed 5,000 people as you raise money and then you show up for the packing event, we're going to feed tens of thousands of people through Feed My Starving Children. Why would we do that? Why would a bunch of Christians that live thousands of miles away in a country where most people are trying to lose weight, not find their next meal, why would we care about hungry people? Because they're just going to be hungry again tomorrow. Well, because Jesus cared about that. Jesus would touch someone's eyes and somebody would see, or he'd touch their lips and they would speak, or he would pray over them and the lame would walk. When is that going to happen? Are you going to go around smacking people in the forehead? That's bad teaching. That's not what that is at all. So what would we do? We would start hospitals. Why did Grace Church build a hospital in the southern part of Chad, Africa? Well, because we want to bring healing. We want to bring healing. Are you making them all become Christians? No. We're trying to express the love and the concern of Jesus Christ to them. Why would you do that? Well, because Jesus did that. And then on an individual level, I'm going to bring that into my life. Why would I give money away that I worked for? Well, because Jesus is a generous God. Why would I open my home? It's really inconvenient. Well, because Jesus is a hospitable person. Why would I interact kindly with a stranger? I got to manage relationships in my life. Because half of Jesus' miracles were interruptions. Why would I care if my neighbor went to heaven or hell? Because Jesus cared if you went to heaven or hell. So an apprentice is going to drop everything, so to say. We're going to learn. We're going to really go after the Bible. That's why we would gather in settings like this and teach the Bible. And then we're going to do the things that Jesus would do. And then here's the big one. Here's the big one, I think, especially in our day. What an apprentice does is they lose their identity. They lose their identity. It's really interesting when you think about this process. When Peter and James and John and those guys signed up to follow Jesus, they signed up to follow him, learn from him, do what he did. But they knew very clearly that they were signing up to lose their own identity. They wanted to become little Christ. So when that accusation went out, you guys are just a bunch of little Christ, they were like, oh, thank you very much. Right? That's exactly who we're trying to be. And I want to get I want to show you something here for a minute. And you're going to have to Bible nerd with me for 4.5 minutes, okay, for this to make sense. These first apprentices or disciples, the way that they would have seen Jesus is they would have seen him as a rabbi. And in the ancient world, a rabbi, the way we would think of a rabbi is we would think of him as a teacher or a master. A teacher and a master is how we would think of him, okay? So the teacher part is easier for us as modern Western people. So the teacher part, they would have thought of Jesus as a spiritual leader, thought of him as highly educated, and thought of him as people helping people understand God and their relationship with him. It's a little bit how you would think of me. Like I'm a spiritual leader, I'm highly educated, I'm sexy, I'm attractive, dynamic, I'm funny, I'm ripped, right? And my whole goal in life is to help you understand who God is. And you trust that relationship, that's why you would come to church, okay? So that like part makes more sense to us. Like Jeff's just trying to help us understand God, and that's why we feel loved by him and things like that, okay? The rabbi part is half teacher, just think of it this way. The other part of it is master, and that part is foreign to us because we're raised to be individualist. So the master part is this. As a master, the goal of the follower is to so deeply adopt the teachings and the lifestyle of their teaching, of the teacher, that they would eventually be mistaken for him. And that part is different. Where you would look and say, like, it would be insulting to you and cult-like to us if you all left and said, we're Jeffians. I'm a Jeffian. So whatever he says, I do. I'll go where you ask me to go, dear Jeff. Right? We would be like, yeah, somebody call somebody, right? Like this is not healthy. But for the disciples, for the apprentices, they would think of Jesus that way. And they want to fully learn, follow, do, and adopt what they're like. If you're a Star Wars fan, it's what a Padawan is. Some of you are like, oh, and some of you are like, I am never coming back, right? So but it's this idea that I fully take on the identity of the master. And what would happen is these rabbis would have what they called a yoke. And a yoke was their teaching and their way of life that came from the teaching. And what an apprentice would do is they would study under the master, they would follow him, learn from him, do what he do, and then in order to become like him, they would take his yoke upon themselves, is how they would say it. And they would yoke themselves to the master and want to be in complete step with him so that they would actually be mistaken for them. And this is what's fascinating. As they would go forward, it was through the embrace of the yoke that the apprentice would then be identified. So that yoke, I'm in sync with my master. Wherever he moves, I move. Whatever he says, I'll say. Whatever he does, whatever he thinks, I'm always trying to take that upon me because I want to be identified with the master. And when you did that, you were thought of then as a Christian. This plays out in Acts chapter 11, starting with verse 19. Watch this. Okay, so the Christians, the apprentices are going all throughout Asia because they're under persecution. One of their leaders, a guy named Stephen, had just been martyred. And so they've scattered to take the good news of Jesus to the Jews and then also to the Gentiles. And some of these apprentices went to a place called Antioch and they began preaching about the Lord Jesus. And the Bible says the power of the Lord was with them, and a large number of these Gentiles believed and turned to the Lord. When the church at Jerusalem heard about what happened, they sent Barnabas to Antioch. When he arrived and saw the evidence of God's blessing, he was filled with joy. He encouraged the believers to stay true to the Lord. Barnabas was a good man full of the Holy Spirit, strong in faith, and many people were brought to the Lord through him. Then Barnabas went to Tarshish to look for who we call the Apostle Paul. When he found him, he brought him back to Antioch. Both of them stayed there with the church for a full year, teaching large crowds of people. And it was at Antioch that the believers were first called Christians. These people who had yoked up to their rabbi Jesus were doing Jesus stuff, teaching Jesus truth, being identified with Jesus, and then an accusation came to them, and the accusation was, those guys are a bunch of little Christ. They just walk around talking about Jesus all the time. They're Christians. And as an apprentice, that would have been the greatest compliment you could have been paid. It almost would have felt like a success. I did it. I will now get my lightsaber, right? I did it. I am completely tied to the one that I love, that I follow, that I learn from, that I imitate, and my identity is now lost in his identity. And that is the reason why, ready? That is the reason why following Jesus was not something you learned about, it was someone you became. Following Jesus was not something that you learned about, it was someone that you became. And when you look at people who did the teachings, who lived the life in which there was no hypocrisy, these are people that you would respect. You would look and say, those guys are Jesus people, the Mother Teresas of the world, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world, and you could go on, my mom, my grandmother, my dad, my Sunday school teacher. When you look back at the people that you respect and you honor, and you say their faith was, they were not abusing the name Christian, they were not using me, they were not taking advantage of me, they were not manipulating me, they genuinely believed and genuinely were following. What you're looking at is you're looking at apprentices. And when you say, my mother reminds me of Christ. When I look back at my mom and I'm like, what she did was, no matter how rough life got, and it got rough, she never wavered from her faith. She would teach me the Bible. How do you know how to live through painful circumstances? I watched my mother do it. And to the moment she took her last breath, she never ceased to be who she had become. She had become like Christ. Because she was an apprentice. She was an apprentice. Right? Now, if following Jesus is something that you learn about, and that's all that it is, here's the temptation you've been wrestling with. And this might explain your walk with God a little bit. If following Jesus is just something that you learn about, then the temptation is that you interact with Jesus based upon someone's skill in teaching you about him. So that's a Western mindset. We do this all the time. I can't do math. Why? My teacher's horrible. Really? It's the teacher's fault? Oh, yeah. If they could teach, I would know how to do math. This may or may not have been a conversation I had recently, right? So okay. So the reason I'm not growing in Christ, maybe this is just how I see this happening. The reason I'm not growing in Christ is because Jeff taught that already. He's not deep enough. Jeff doesn't know Greek, and I do, by the way. But anyways, right? So I'm not growing. And what we're saying is, if you would have inspired me, right? If you would, it's every teacher at every level of education hears this from parents. If you were better, then my kid would know the color spectrum by now. They're 4, right? And that's a Western mindset, and we bring it to our relationship with Jesus. And what that does is it transfers the responsibility for your spiritual growth from you to me. And I better be on, and I better be entertaining, and it better be fresh, or whoever your spiritual leader is. I'm just standing up here leading spiritually, so I'm using myself, right? But that's how I do it. I left my church because they don't feed me. They don't feed me. You mean they don't have picnics? No, we have lots of picnics. I can tell, but I'm saying, like, spiritually, right, they don't feed me. Well, right? Now, as a dad, if I have a child, Heidi and I have 6 children that we raised, our 3 daughter-in-laws that somebody else did a really great job with. We just get the benefits from. But if I have a child coming to me and say, Dad, I'm hungry. You need to feed me. There would be such a complex number of problems that would be happening right there. And one of the things I would say is, there's a kitchen, go feed yourself. What are you talking to me for? So if I think of following Jesus from the lenses of a student, I transfer the responsibility of my spiritual growth to the teacher, and then I'll blame whatever teacher I think I need to blame for my lack of following Jesus. Ready? If I'm an apprentice, if I take on the the position of apprentice, then you are becoming someone. You are becoming someone, which means that every piece of information, every life lesson, every trial, every sacrifice, every victory is one more piece of truth, one more piece of you being equipped. It's one more thing your master offers you. And when I receive that from my master, when I allow myself to be coached, when I allow my form to be corrected, when I allow that little piece of mistruth to be pressed in, when I allow my identity to be set aside, my master will give grace to the humble, but he will oppose the proud. And when I take the mindset of an apprentice, then every aspect of life that God walks me through or allows to walk me through, I receive as a part of my master's training. Why? Because I'm following him. I'm not telling him where to go. I'm not saying I'm not going down that path. I'm following him, and he is a loving master whose burden is easy, whose yoke is light, Jesus says. Because he's helping me to become someone. He's not filling me full of information about himself. And the difference between what we tend to think of Christianity and what is apprenticeship in the Bible is night and day. And which part of that I embrace will absolutely be life-changing for me. Apprenticeship is hard. It requires full commitment. You can't go halfway into an apprenticeship. It takes a lifetime. It will disrupt your life, absolutely, and it will change you. It will change you. And it's an idea that we have to get our head around. Here's where we struggle now a little bit as kind of like modern people. We live in a YouTube world, which is fine. I like YouTube, right? So we live in a YouTube world. But in a YouTube world, this is what we think. We think if we watch a 90-second video on something, that we now have mastered that thing. Now, all the studies say that you have to spend 10,000 hours in your craft before you master it. 10,000 hours in your craft before you master it. But we live in a YouTube world where we just look something up, we look at it, we try to copy it, and we think we're a master of it. So Heidi and I are remodeling our basement. Heidi's remodeling our basement. I'm complaining about remodeling our basement, if I'm just being honest with you. So she decided we're going to remodel our basement. So she went and bought 2x4s one day, and I went to leave the house, and there was 200 2x4s behind my truck, and that's how I found out we were remodeling our basement. And so we're doing this, and she said, I want to do it ourselves, because we like to do projects. I'm like, okay, this will be fun, sort of. And so like we'll do this ourselves. So she said, we need to build walls. I said, I don't really know how to build walls. My friend Andy one time taught me how to build a wall, but I wouldn't say I'm a wall builder. And so she said, let's YouTube it. I'm like, okay, why don't you YouTube it? So she YouTubed it, and she said, we know how to build walls now. So we started building walls, and then I would go to the office and serve Jesus, and she would say, home, build walls. And so I'd come home, and she's like, help me stand this wall up and all these kind of things. So before too long, we had framed out the exterior walls of our basement, and we did it from YouTube. So now it was time to get involved in parts of the basement I don't know anything about. And I knew that we needed to have some electric and this and that and everything. And one of my buddies here at church was like, hey, if you need any help with electric, let me know. And so I was like, hey, man, I need some help with the electric. He's like, oh, yeah, I'll come over. So he came over and looked at my electric, and he said, he goes, we can start running these wires, but you really need to like do some other stuff with the framing before we do electric. And I said, like what? He goes, well, Now, what he does, he's been in construction for 30 years. He's got 10,000 hours in him. So he's like, well, first of all, you should do this and this and this and this and this, and then you should do this, and then we're going to have to reinforce that, and then we're going to have to get a level out and maybe fix this a little bit. Don't tell Heidi. And like, we're going to have to do that and the other thing, and you want to do this before you do that, and then you should really do this before you do that, and then you want to be sure to run the plumbing, and then you want to get your AVHC in, and then you want to, and he went off this whole thing, and I'm standing there and I'm thinking, I know how to build walls. I know how to build walls, right? My walls aren't going to fall down. Ready? I don't actually know how to redo a basement, but I know how to build a wall. And when I walked into my basement, I was staring at a wall. Wall. That wall is level. Wall. When a master walked into the basement, he saw basement. He saw basement. And he saw what could have been done, should have been done. Did you think about this? Did you think about that? Did you think about the other? I'm like, I wouldn't have actually known to think about all of that. But I know how to do walls. And this is what happens. You can Google a list about how to fix something in your life, and you'll get a list, you'll get a wall. You won't get a life. You won't get help for your soul, but you can probably stop smoking. You can go to TikTok's not a total waste; it's just mostly one. But you can get principles off of TikTok. Hi, I'm a Christian. Hey, let me talk about how to follow Jesus today. You know, like you can get that kind of stuff off TikTok, right? You can. And it's not invaluable. It's a wall. You can get a wall, but you can't figure out your childhood and how that affects your relationship with God. You can get stuff off of Instagram. You can get information. You can get teaching, but it's not apprenticeship. It's not apprenticeship. There's no depth to it. There's no meaning to it. There's no global view. My friend saw a basement. I saw a wall. I saw a wall. And when we approach Christ this way, give me 10 steps to have a healthy marriage. Well, here's 10 steps. They're not going to work for you because it's in the context of a basement. These are just a wall. Give me 4 principles to have better finances. Okay, like, don't go into debt. There's one, right? It's true, but it's not generosity. It's a wall. It's not a basement. Give me 3 ways to overcome anxiety in my life. Okay, you should pray, you should read, you should meditate. There's some stuff. It's not going to work because it's God who changes the heart, and that's what alters the mind. I mean, it's a wall. It's not a basement. And an apprentice follows, learns, does, makes those practices and teachings their own. And Jesus looks at us and says, come, be my apprentice. Apprenticeship is deep. That's what makes it rich. Apprenticeship is disruptive. That's what makes it life-changing. Apprenticeship is not an add-on. It's a replacement of. And apprenticeship is the call and the invitation of Christ. Okay? Now, over the next few weeks, we're going to take this journey. And I think there's a few chairs that you might be sitting in here. And I just want to invite you into this journey, right? So some of you are looking for a path to travel in life. And if you're that person, then what I'm saying is resonating with you. There is something meaningful and powerful something that changes you and changes the people around you. There is something eternal. There is something that it does fulfill you and it does bring joy, but that does not mean that it makes you wealthy and makes your life easy. But all these guys, Peter, James, John, Andrew, all those guys, they died for Jesus. That's how deeply they came to believe in who he was and what he did. And some of you lack anything to believe in. You got everything and you got nothing. And Jesus says, if you want to follow me, I want to invite you to do that, but that means you lose that life to gain this one. And we'll show you what that is, and I want you to know that every step of it, that Christ is inviting you. He's inviting you to that. The other chair is this. Some of us have been working hard at being Christians, but not apprentices. That's how I grew up. That's what I did until I was a junior in college. I was a pretty decent Christian, honestly. Didn't smoke a lot, I chewed quite a bit, didn't drink a lot, didn't date girls who do, dated other ones. Like I did all of that, went to church, knew the Bible, went to Christian, so I went to a religious school. My dad, it was important to him. I didn't go to public school, I went to a religious school. So I had all that information. I was really good at being a Christian. I didn't even know what it meant to follow Jesus. And when I was a junior in college and those lights came on and somebody led me to apprenticeship, that was life-changing. And from the time I was a junior in college until my birthday was just on Friday, I'm 53. From a time I was a junior in college till I'm 53, I can tell you I've never wasted one day of my life. Because it's all been in pursuit of Christ. Everything about my life has meaning and value. And I didn't say it was easy. I didn't say I'm happy all the time. But I've never wasted a day of my life. I'm grateful for that, see. I wasted a bunch of days of my life trying to be a good Christian because I would go to church and endure it. Like, how much longer can this guy go on, right? Oh, crud, now it's this time in the service. Following Jesus, different. So some of you have been great Christians and never even knew that you're supposed to be apprentices. And want to help you understand what that is and help you understand how to take it on. And then some of us have just been lost. You've lost something in your journey with Jesus, guys. And I see this a lot. And it happens as we get older sometimes. It happens in life change. It happens through pain. It happens through success. Your spiritual passion is something that you remember. It's a part of your past. It's not a part of your present. And so when you look at other people who are spiritually passionate, you remember being like that. And if you're not careful, you'll say, well, that's how kids are, or that's how new Christians are, or that's just how they are. And there was a time, but it's not this time. And the reason that it's not this time is probably tied to the idea that you're being a faithful Christian, but not a passionate apprentice. And what Christ wants to do is he wants to awaken you. There's revival happening all around you. Google it. All around. Hundreds of thousands of people being baptized. Tens of thousands of people coming to Christ. Thousands of people's lives being changed. That's happening in our church as well as across the world. And if you're a passive observer or someone who looks and says, that's great, I'm really glad the church is doing that, then your passion for Jesus is a memory, not a reality, and God is calling you to more. More. Not more time, not more money, not more burden, because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. But he's going to look at you and say, why don't we finish life as strongly as we started it? Now that you have time and freedom, what if we invest more than we used to because I don't have the tension of running the kids around? And there's a life, and a powerful life, an incredible life. And I know that many of you have mastered the wall, but there's this beautiful redesign. There's a beautiful redesign that the master wants to walk you through. And to all of that, Jesus would call us and he'd ask the question, same one he asked those disciples, who wants to come and follow me? Come and be my apprentice, right? Okay. Would you pray with me as the band resets this platform here? We're gonna sing a beautiful song called From the Inside Out. It's a prayer. And Jesus, as we kind of sit in this moment and enjoy and celebrate our moms and gratefully remember for some of us our moms and some of us even mourn, grieve a little bit. But here we are. We're here. And would you meet us in this place, God? Would you awaken in us a desire for something more? Would you reawaken in us a passion that once was? And would you clarify for us the difference between joining a group and joining you? So Jesus, as we pray, and then this song, Lord, I love it. From the inside out, would you change us? Would you make us something new, something different? And God, whether we're here just because mom asked or we're here because we're deeply seeking you, would you meet us personally, unexpectedly, and powerfully in this moment? And God, help us to see your invitation and give us faith and courage as we consider accepting it.